Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. We today are going to talk about feeling all the feels.
Oh, the fears. Hi, Zoe. I'm Polly.
Hi, Polly. I'm Zoe, and we are
Pilot light.
Pilot Light. We are. We are loving doing this video series for you, and
So much.
we are hoping you're loving them too, and the feedback we're getting is deeply beautiful. And one of the themes that Polly and I love to rumpus around in together, but also that we see in our facilitation rooms come up over and over again, questions and really interesting thinking about feelings and how appropriate they are or inappropriate they are in a work setting, or even personally, what you allow yourself to feel and what you allow yourself to express. And the feelings that you disavow and that you won't sit, me, I'm going to talk in an we're so comfortable sitting in those happy, lovely, easy emotions. But what happens when we don't bring our curiosity to and our compassion to and our attention to what have historically been classified as darker emotions? So that's where we're going to rumpus today, friends.
I love it. Feel all the feels. I think this is a real thing at the moment because I keep on, you're talking about it. It came up in something I was reading the other day, this invitation and sort of a clarion call to begin to feel into every part of ourselves so we don't cauterize that spirit. And what does that mean? So I'd love to unpack today. What does that mean in relation to feeling all the feels? How do you express that? How do you feel all the feels? How do you feel all the feels in a work context? Like what are we saying? What are we doing in that space? I'd love to have that exploration because I think we all need to get some better skills. I certainly do.
I agree. Well, I think historically we've been told, and what we hear from people and what you and I have experienced is that at work, complicated feelings not appropriate. It looks unprofessional. And so then there's this split that happens, and you and I talk a lot about integrated self, and we talk about that a lot when we're facilitating. And I think there's a quality of self-shaming, isn't there? I mean, I bang on about that beautiful Rebecca Traister book, Good and Mad, because it redefined my experience of my understanding of my own rage and my own anger, which preceding that book, I'd always thought was ugly and unacceptable and unintegrated. And that if I move more towards being Buddha-like, there would be less and less of that in me. So I'd love to start by talking about the hierarchy of feelings. Are some feelings better than others, as in more valuable? Are some feelings less acceptable in a true sense, when we really look at them, as opposed to what we're societally expected, what society is expected of us? Go.
I just had a moment. I'm having a lot of moments when my brain's just giving me information that I've never thought of before. I just had a moment of thinking about feeling all the feels, and I'm going to come and answer your question any minute now.
Yeah.
And I just had this moment of realizing that feeling all the feels isn't expressing all the feels. I think I get caught up in this, so like I'm enraged. What am I going to do in a work context? But it's I'm enraged. What is happening in my heart? What has been the thing that has preceded this emotion rising, so I can then sit with it and understand it? So that's been really interesting, because I'm always like, but I don't want to be in the workplace going, and now here's my PowerPoint presentation. Fuck, I hate all of you.
Totally. We're not talking about oversharing, and we're not talking about handing emotion to somebody else to solve it in you. But if we disavow specific emotions in ourselves, what are we doing there? Yeah. But I want to ask about the hierarchy.
So I would say that from a purest sort of spiritual perspective, there is nothing is better or worse, because everything is a fiction. Everything's an artifact of the mind. And the purpose of mind training, meditation, all of that work is to feel all the feels, observe all the feels, and integrate all the feels. So you can't love joy and not love sorrow, because it's kind of all the same. It's all you. So it can't be like and I think this is the thing we do. We go to the crack of, I want all the serotonin feels, and I don't want those feels that make me kind of really down and blue, and I'm frightened of that. So we go this bad, which is why I have complex relationships with the idea of the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of anything as an overarching place rather than equanimity. I mean, that's really like the ultimate. And there's always that example I give from the stories of the Buddha, where, you know, the Buddha's got someone massaging one shoulder and a tiger clawing at the other one, and he says, oh, I don't feel any difference, because he's not valorizing the pain over the pleasure. It's just like, this is pain, this is pleasure. Now, that's a long way for most of us. Speaking a nice statement.
Imagine having
much as
those skills.
Much as I love a tiger and I also love a massage, I feel I might squeal a bit when those claws went into my shoulder. But you know, so I think that for me there isn't better or worse. For me, there is just more and more capacity to observe, to step back and understand what that emotion is. And, you know, as Pema would say, you know, Pema Chodron, you're making friends with yourself, making friends with that emotion, so you understand it. What about you?
Well, last week I read a book called Emptiness Dancing by Ashanti. And he talks about, is it by Ashanti? Maybe. Let's put an asterisk beside that, and I might have to come back. And he talks about the fact that we can't have that suffering and the dark emotions, I'm paraphrasing, give us depth. And I love that. And I believe that that's true. I think to know pain is to learn empathy. And to know isolation is to understand the importance of connection. And I love to look at, so to speak in an I statement, it won't surprise you, Polly, that as a child I was very emotional. And explicitly and implicitly I was told that was too much. And I grew up in a brain-based household. So, you know, when someone asked me how I was, I would respond with an I feel statement. I feel. And it used to make people very uncomfortable. They want to know how you feel. They want to know what you're doing. Or, you know, just I'm fine. But I am a big feeler. And as I've got older, it's my North Star. Like, I know where the truth sits for me. With how I feel. That's where my instinct sits, and where I know my integrity sits too, because I can feel out of integrity really clearly in my heart. So for me, that has been a real journey of, so last week I was poorly and COVID and having complex relationship stuff with one of my children. And I kind of got knocked down by that constellation of things. And I broke a bit on the ground, and it took me a while to get back up. But I was in this frustration for a while, and I was embarrassed, and I felt self-indulgent, and we've all been cooped in with COVID. And then when I gave myself permission just to go, okay, Zoe, how are you feeling? And I felt like I was a failure, and I felt overwhelmed, and I felt hurt, and I felt angry. It's very interesting watching that shift, which just happens, where when I was in allowal, I wish there was a better word, that sounds ugly, but when I allowed that in myself, I could come to a place of starting to process very gently and then moving through. The stagnation ceased. And I don't think it's too big a thing to say. I think that's grace to be afforded that. But I needed to honor the truth of what was happening and not just, you know, and I felt, and the other thing is at the age of 42, I felt embarrassed by those feelings. I felt weak and self-indulgent and silly, and so much judgment in all of that.
It's so interesting, that thing about where the truth is. And, you know, we've talked about this a lot throughout the whole video series, that the truth is in the body. The truth is in the somatic response, because whether it's coming from a sort of primordial brain release of hormones and chemicals, or whether it's coming from an intuitive knowing of what is, it's physical. It's not in the brain. The brain is just such a trap for us to fall into. And so I think the idea of feel all the feels is exactly that. It's not think all the feels. It's not rationalize all the feels. It's not describe all the feels. It's feel all the feels. And so if we're cutting off any of that, and you know, much like we just do keen so much in our society towards binary-based descriptions. We've got light and we've got dark. It's like when we did success and failure. It's like light and dark are the same thing. They're in the same dance. You can't have the light without the dark. So to make it that one is good and one is bad, as against they are the whole. We are the wholes. H-O-L-E. No, W-H-O-L-E. We're the whole. So we can't disavow the dark feelings. And so if you go from that premise that the experience of being human is the experience of suffering, if we're in perfect connection with Creator, if we're in perfect connection with everyone else, we don't have that suffering. But that's not the experience of the lived experience of humanity. That's the experience, as the texts would tell us, of what it is to be divine, what it is to be out of our bodies, what it is to be connected to the universe. Putting all that language aside, the feeling or the feels is what we're here for. We're here to be embodied. You know, we're beings in a human experience. And so this is a real invitation to ask us why we stopped feeling to start with, why we started to privilege and valorize some feelings and not others, and then why we attached them to stigma. And I mean, you can't look at the history of psychoanalysis and women without looking at hysteria, and that's feeling all the feels, but it's seen as being out of control. And so a whole half of the planet gets shut down because if you're feeling, you're hysterical. And I think we carry that shame as a gender across generations.
Absolutely. And where do you think it happened that we started as a species to value the brain, thought, so much more than feeling, where feeling became this feminized, hysterical thing? And it also became, you know, that men were quarterized from their feeling, and that to do that indicated weakness. Like, how did that happen to us?
It happened after the Enlightenment, when we started to value science and maths over what had been always mystical experiences. So there's an absolute arc where we see a movement from what also had a lot of downsides in terms of sort of a very mysterious and superstitious based existence, which was highly reliant on spiritual beliefs, which also involved drowning a lot of women because they were witches and that kind of stuff. But we moved very clearly to a very rational, science-based, measured and data, and no emotion was in it. So it was we just swung too far, and we're beginning to swing back. So if you do that quote that I love you doing and I make you do so often, which is
Manuska Shafiq, the head of the London School of Economics. In the past, jobs were about muscles. Right now, they're about brains. But in the future, they'll be about hearts.
So if you think about that, that is the history of where we've moved to sort of in industrialization post-Enlightenment, where we really saw that. So if you replace muscle with sort of random superstition or random elemental stuff. So we got a lot of information from the stars and from the plants and from the stories of our forebears and from the mystical tradition, which we didn't need to explain because they'd been passed down in an oral tradition forever. Very potted, very inaccurate history. Historians and scientists listening, I know you're upset. And then when we move into the industrialized era, we see that we make machines that make things. So we're using brain, we've used muscle we've used brain to control. But that doesn't allow all of the information, all the patterning and all the messages that sit within feelings. So we kind of threw the feelings out with the bathwater to valorize the brain and thinking, because we thought that it was expansive and wide and wasn't containing all the biases and all of the patterns that it does. And I think this is where we're at now, and certainly in a leadership sense, this is the whole heart of the work that we do, is around this idea that we have, without it being woo-woo and superstitious and you know, fluff and throw it away, we have so much wisdom and information that sits within our intuitive bodies. And when we combine that with data, and when we can combine that with feeling, and we are open to all those feelings, if we're going to do something and we've got a really strong bodily feeling, our tendency is to go, I'm going to go with my brain, I'm just going to shut that down. And how many stories have we heard of people who have gone, I know this is crazy, but I'm following that feeling, and it's been completely validated. Like, we don't know how to contain it or to describe it or how to measure it, so we don't validate it. But it's as valid as the limits of our thinking, which is all controlled by the stories of our past.
I have a great anecdote about a friend of mine who he surprised himself by resigning recently. And he was on a call pitching to his investors, and as he was pitching, he got this incredibly strong feeling which presented itself with such strength that it became his truth of, I don't want to do this anymore. And this is a deeply rational person, deeply committed, deeply loyal. And then he found the words coming out of his mouth, and then he talked himself out of a job. And it's been the decision of his life, actually, certainly his work life. And it's been this radical shift for him that it didn't come from his brain, which is where he's moved and plowed forward in the most sort of traditional, successful landscape. And now his heart, and I think that's an embodiment of that quote that we're talking about. I really do. And so, Polly, I'd like to ask about, because we often we have women particularly talk to us about the fear of crying at work and the fear of being emotional at work. So can we speak to that a bit? Because I feel great empathy for that, and it's not easy, is it? So what would you say to that?
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because it's like, I mean, and we also have a lot of men who talk about, when we're talking about vulnerability, and that absolutely rigid belief that vulnerability is weakness. I think for women, crying at work seems like weakness. It feels like you can't control the emotions. We shouldn't be controlling the emotions. And I think there's a difference too, like this is the nuance, isn't it? Like there's a difference between sitting at a desk wailing like, you know, the world's going to end, and how that impacts the people around you. So I think, where do you find the place where you're feeling the feelings, not acting out the feelings? I don't know. I've had plenty of private little sobs in the toilet in my corporate days. No question about that. But rarely in a meeting would I have had tears. I would have held on, and then I would have gone and been valiant and noble and stuffed all my feelings down. Then I would have cried. So I don't know. It's kind of tricky. I guess there's something very beautiful about someone being able to say, this is how I'm feeling right now because of this, or that thing has made me feel like this. The problem is, I think so many people are not still ready in a non-intimate environment, non-friend-based environment, to know how to handle that, and to be able to be empathetic and to see vulnerability and to value it, and to not go, oh God, we can't have her in a meeting, we can't talk about this stuff anymore. I don't know. What do you feel? That's not really an answer, because I think it's tricky.
No, we don't need to get to an answer. It's just it's marauding about it. So I had a client some years ago. I did speak to you about Polly. I don't know if you remember. She was a very high up position at Google, and I realized after doing a couple of one-on-one sessions with her that actually the primary thing she wanted to deal with was suppressing her emotional self in meetings. And I gave her techniques, using her breath, pulling her shoulders down, turning towards the emotion, recognizing where it comes from. And she was still crying in meetings. And then I said to her, then we did some work around, well, what happens if you stop judging it and you don't shame yourself from it? And because actually where it came from was that she's an amazing woman, deeply, deeply passionate and underslept. And it wasn't a big ranty tear thing. It would just be a tear that would come down the side of her face. And I said, well, what about if, and it would just be internal meetings, So I said, what happens if you just can put a context around it for your team and say, look, I'm not going to be embarrassed about this anymore. I don't want you to be either. These are the behaviors that I need from you in response to this. This is what I don't. And let's move forwards. And then guess what happened? Never happened in the meeting again. So she created the dynamic that she needed to feel where she could be expressed. And she became so pathologically terrified of this behavior that she thought was unprofessional, that it was that classic, don't think about a blue elephant, don't think about a blue elephant. And you just see this woman talk about her specialty within Google, and you think this is a person that is alive with passion and professionalism, and would be great fun in a pub. I thought that too. So I'm interested in the other ways of solving this, rather than it's bad, like to look at why. Certainly if it's a manipulation, certainly if it's that you're constantly feeling overwhelmed, maybe it's that you need some therapy or you need to change jobs, but that actually, like in that woman, was kind of healthy and magnificent.
Yeah, I think that's the truth, though, isn't it? That it is healthy and magnificent. And as you said before, it's the truth manifest in our bodies. When that emotion comes up, it's because it's telling us something. It's almost like, I've tried every other way, I'm going to try this now, like out your face holes. And I think it is the invitation for us to go and follow the crumbs and follow the trail and find out what is the precursor to that. What am I actually crying about? Is it this one thing? And it might be, someone might have just treated you horrifically in a meeting. But it also might be that it's a combination of memories and of triggers of previous events which layer up. And so you're the symptom of something that happened far earlier in your life that you need to then work with. So I think we all need to get better at holding space for emotion And recognizing that, and I actually had this conversation with one of my coaching clients maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, who was saying that they had a staff member who would come into work and just, they were having a very difficult time in their life and just sob. They'd sit on the lounge at work and sob. And it was really disruptive, and it was becoming a problem for her as a manager. And it was just like, so there's a point at which empathy says, you're not in the right state to be at work right now. So let's work out, how do you get some space and time to deal with this thing, which is so present and so overwhelming? How do we support you in that? What does that look like? Because this is not good for you to be in here doing this. And I think that was the truth. The truth was, it wasn't good to have her sobbing for 3 hours on the couch in the middle of an open retail space. And that wasn't an unkindness. That was a really nice boundary. That was a clear as kind, we're going to support you through this. We're not abandoning you, but this is bigger than the thing you're meant to be doing, which is coming into work. And I think there's that too, is how do we support and hold the space for people who are experiencing emotion. We don't do that well as a culture. I don't think we do that well. And so, I mean, and I guess this is the work of Dare to Lead and Daring Leadership so much, is about how do we be vulnerable and authentic, and how do we hold that with empathy and compassion.
I think that's a beautiful place to end on that. I think just to reiterate, I mean, where I'm at the moment is no emotions off limits, and looking at them directly is deeply helpful and allows them to integrate. And I won't shame myself for feeling emotions, and knowing when I need to recede and deal with them privately. And that idea of it's very different to feel as opposed to share your emotion. And then, you know, would it be right if we talked about that experience yesterday, Polly, where you shared an emotion with me? Do you want to tell that? I'm sorry, I've pushed you into this. I'm sorry.
Do you want to tell that? Oh, actually, no.
Let me tell your story. If you don't want to tell it, I'm happy to do a tap down.
I did to talk about it on an open webinar last night. So yeah, I can't deny you that. Well, I was practicing Feel All the Feels. This is why this is so interesting, that really thinking about that we had a large webinar Zoë and I were doing yesterday that was plagued with technical issues on every single level, which for those of people who haven't ever done a webinar, as someone who's speaking in it, you're trying to really hold, for me, I'm trying to really hold the space of being with the audience who I can't see, remembering all the things I have to talk about, so I'm not scripted and I'm not kind of doing this while I'm talking, so I'm really present. And at the same time, if I'm trying to work out what's happening with all the technical malfunction, it can be really hard to hold it all together. So I knew from the beginning, when I woke up yesterday morning and my body was just like, and I'm not generally a person who suffers anxiety, but I had all the feels. I was in meditation, I had all the feels. I had all the feels all morning. I was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I was just thinking about all of the things that could go wrong, and customers, and I didn't want them to be let down. I didn't want to let our client down. And then I thought, this is going to really impact me. This is impacting me already, because it's starting to move into deep micromanagement. And it's like, now I've got to make sure that Zoë, I can control her. She's the one thing I can do. What can I make sure that nothing's going to go wrong? And I just went, this is it. This is Feel All the Feels. So I had to send Zoë a text saying, I need to let you know I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling a lot of stress. I can't control anything. I'm so worried about this. And I knew that the Feeling All the Feels for me was a process of going, when I say this to Zoë, she's not going to feel like I've handed her a gift of my feelings that she has to manage. What I was giving her was the gift of, I'm being micro honest with you about this stuff, so you know what's happening, because it's not like how I normally feel. And it was a really great thing, because none of the impacts were in the presentation. It all went, it was all right on the night, as they say. But it was the first time I think I've really allowed myself to not be the one who's, in control and 100% professional and nothing's going to faze me. It was going, I'm phased. Here it is, I'm phased. In my body, I'm phased. And it was it was vulnerable for me to expose that, because maybe I was like, maybe Zoe's going to think I'm letting her down. Maybe she's I feel like I've just shanghaied her into this gig, and then suddenly I'm just dropping all in, And I was like, I'm making up stories.
And it was, because my experience of it was entirely different, which was gratitude. That we were functioning properly on a high level as a team. which is you told me what was going on with you. You didn't need me to solve it or fix it. You gave me the opportunity to know what I was walking into so I could best support us to deliver excellence. And I saw it as deeply professional. It struck me as deeply professional. This is my experience. I'm like, okay, great. And I can work with that. I'm happy that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because sorry to cut you off. It just reminded me of that thing that we often talk about where, you know, the people who are most promoted, the people who are seen as most professional are the ones that ask for help.
Yeah.
And we always sort of say that because it shows that this is the actual landscape. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, look, and then the other part of it was she trusts me enough, trusts me enough to deliver this vulnerability. And she trusts me that I'm going to be able to action this appropriately, that I'm not going to call you up and drum up the anxiety further. And I'm not going to, that actually I could just write to you and say, I've got this. I think I wrote, if you need to lie down on the ground and scream, I've got this, which is all anyone can do. And then just making sure I brought levity to the initial experience and making sure that I was on really early so I wasn't something else you needed to worry about. And it was feeling the feels, taking ownership of your feels, sharing it really appropriately. But it actually, I think, meant that we delivered a better product.
Yeah, and it was a really good learning experience in terms of trying to put into practice. I mean, I talk a lot about spiritual shit all the time. You'd see it in these videos. And for me, you know, I'd been in meditation that morning, feeling all the feels and thinking, oh God, it's like, I can meditate my way out of this. This is how you do it, right? You just meditate and then you calm it all down. And I was just sort of asking for guidance about what was happening. And I got this incredibly clear message, like straight through, like someone was talking in my head that just said, suffer and see. And I was like, damn it, that's not the answer I wanted. Suffer and see sounds like shit. And I'm going to feel feeling like this all day. I wanted like, just, you know, say a mantra and whoa, what happened? And so all day long, I was just like, suffer and see, suffer and see, suffer and see. And I was sitting there and I had like really bad stomach pains. I was really anxious and it was like, you know, we're 5 minutes till go time and I was still trying to like bolt on a stand for the technology that wasn't working. Suffer and see, suffer and see. And it was really great because I kept on simultaneously going, this is in your head. Like you're actually creating the reality for yourself of anxiety and of stress. Because like, what would happen if you just went into this and going, this is really fun. People are going to find it funny if everything goes to shit. It's like, no one's going to care. It's not that big, but it was really nice to start feeling that separation of the observer going, I see what you're doing here, you crazy little nutbag, but we'll just keep on going because it's really working out for you. And at the same time going, as soon as we started, just going, oh, okay, so that was all nothing because what's happening now is we're both fully focused, we've dissolved into service, we're doing everything we can. And that feels so good. There's nothing that feels as good as that. So yeah. I'm like, this is why I feel all the feels is my favorite video I've done because I feel all the feels now. I've learned what it's like. You're in trouble now, Zoe Coyle.
Oh, no, I love it. But also, and when we did that webinar, just as a complete aside, but I just want to share with you, Polly knows this. It was a big webinar. There were a lot of people on there, and there's a recording of it. And you know, I'm working from home, Planet COVID, and there's a sign on my door, and there's a sign on the front door saying, "Don't ring the bell." And the dog is in her crate in the garage. And in the space of this 1 hour, I had 2 children at home sick. So let the dog into the room. The dog was trying to get up on my lap. The doorbell rang. Then my eldest child came into the room, was sending me texts and doing these words like, look at your text, and then waving her arms around. And I was trying to do my job. And at the meantime, doing these ones with my job. And then I tell you, at the end of the webinar, I sent Polly texts and say, you know, if you want to evacuate from our friendship and our company, totally understood. And then walked out and felt all the feels, and actually I was like a cartoon character. I was just walking around in my hair going, oh my goodness. It was so extreme. And then I processed it. I managed not to beat anyone to a pulp, but I came close. Oh, and actually a friend of mine who's a barrister this morning, I told her that anecdote, and she said, oh, we call that having a stroke outside your body. Loved it.
So it's so funny. Like, I mean, part like Unpacked is kind of like, you know, it's like part like behind the scenes. This is the reality. I was just thinking that's the reality of, I think so often you see this sort of super professional shit. Everyone, like, we get up in the morning and we've got period pain, or we've got children sick at home, or we've got screaming stuff, or we've just got weird niggling feelings, or whatever it is. And, you know, we don't get on and say, oh, guys, I'm still having a shocker today, you know, because it's like we have to have these appearances. So why I love this video series so much is that we made a really strong commitment to you that we're going to tell you how it is. And I love that because that was if I had no idea any of that was going on for Zoe, so she sent me this text and I'm like, what? Like, you were great. Like, really, you were like this, it was next to you that was going on, because we were both just so in the zone of it. I'm like, that went so well. My whole iPad didn't even collapse like I thought it was going to. So I was loving that idea of what the real is and what the unreal is. And that's feeling all the feels. In a nutshell, that's feeling all the feels.
It sure is. Hey, and look, our dear buddies out there, thank you so much for staying with us. And we love you, and we love all your feelings.
Yeah, and we love all the shares, and we say it in other videos, but it's so lovely when we get the messages from you. We feel like we're doing something which is just really true and honest and in service and playful, and we're glad that that's how it's being received. So thank you. There's more to come. We'll keep on feeling the feels. Hope you're all feeling the feels. We invite you to have a day of just like feeling the feels.
Yeah, do it, buddies.
Do it.
All right, over and out.
See you in the next video.
See you in the next video.